We have just learned that another Capitol rioter is now in police custody. Suspected white supremacist Robert Packer was arrested this morning in Newport News, Virginia. He was seen on the Capitol grounds wearing a Camp Auschwitz shirt. He's expected to appear in court in Norfolk soon. So let's bring in right now Frederick M. Lawrence, distinguished lecturer in law at Georgetown University. Great to have you here with us. I'm looking forward to your insight on the charges that we're seeing for these rioters. Now, yesterday we heard a Justice Department strike force is seeking to assemble a sedition case against some of these people involved in the riots last week. So can you explain sedition, conspiracy cases, and the likelihood that these charges stick?
These are very, very serious charges. Sedition is punishable by up to 20 years imprisonment. Sedition is a crime involving not only violence, but an attempt to overthrow the government by violence, or an attack on the government. These are things we haven't talked much about in this country since the Civil War, to a certain extent on and off since then, but this is dramatically different kind of conversation to have these kinds of crimes on the table. And if you look at what's coming out of the Department of Justice, the FBI, the U.S. Attorney's Office, I think they have put a lot of resources into this, and they are looking very seriously at all of these charges, right up to and including attempted murder and assault with a deadly weapon, and tragically, in a couple of cases, murder.
Right. I was going to ask you if you foresee any other charges that we would be hearing about. You know, people were saying that these rioters broke into and entered the Capitol, but it's a different thing on a federal level when you break and enter into a federal building. What kind of other federal crimes are you expecting to hear about?
You know, some of the crimes that sound like basic crimes, things like violent entry and disorderly conduct on the Capitol grounds, that's punishable under federal law up to 10 years. Possession of a firearm or dangerous weapon in a federal facility, punishable by up to 10 years. The damage to government property, depending on the level of damage done. If it's over $1,000 worth of damage, that can be up to 10 years. The picture you're showing right now is more than $1,000 worth of property damage. So in all of these cases, what criminal defense lawyers would call the exposure, the potential criminal liability for these suspects, these rioters, is very high and very serious.
Yeah, and I believe that this is the video of rioters beating and dragging a police officer out of the Capitol. So, as you mentioned, extremely serious. I do want to ask you, if there are indeed convictions in these cases, how do those felony convictions affect these people's lives? I'm thinking it's hard to get a job, you can't vote. What are the other impacts of this?
Absolutely. It can affect their career in the military. For those who are in the military, they'd have to get a special exemption from the Department of Defense. Otherwise, they can't serve. There are many jobs that you are not able to serve in, police officers. Interestingly, the New York City Fire Department is actually has a project looking for former felons, but I think they're looking for reformed felons, not people who are in the midst of serving a sentence for a violent crime. Voting rights varies by state, but as many as 20 states will suspend your ability to vote during the time you're a felon, and in some states thereafter. So these have very, very serious ramifications. I think it's easy to think of this as a demonstration that got out of hand. It was not that, those of us who watched this last week. And if you watch the response of law enforcement, it is being taken very seriously.
You're absolutely right. Last question for you. And you mentioned this. Law enforcement agencies are finding that police officers and members of the military were involved in these riots. What does punishment look like for them?
Certainly, if you are a serving officer, if you're currently on duty, this could be grounds for termination. Most of those have some kind of a clause in their contract or their collective bargaining unit about moral turpitude, and a violation of federal law generally will trigger that. And certainly this kind of seditious behavior, violent behavior, and in certain cases, homicidal behavior, I think you will see people losing jobs. Look, the last thing I would mention on this is that you have people who are on tape. There are hundreds and hundreds of hours of viewing of tape that will help make these cases as well.
Mr. Frederick Lawrence, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. It is greatly appreciated. Thank you for sharing your insight. Have a great rest of your day.
Pleasure. Stay safe. Good being with you today.
You too. We'll be right back.